All right, so this is Chapter 1, Section 2 of Openstax U.S. History, Europe on the Brink of Change. So last section, we talked about the Americas. And really kind of the focal point in this first chapter is the year 1492. That's when Old World, Europe, Asia, and Africa, and the New World essentially become one, right? You know, they collide together after 10,000 years of isolation from one another. So this collision here, we've already focused on the New World. Now let's focus a little bit on the Old World, more specifically Europe. Politically speaking, Europe is fragmented. Europe had not been unified politically since the Roman Empire. And when the Roman Empire fell in 476 CE, that's roughly 1,000 years before Christopher Columbus, it gave way to a period known as the Dark Ages or the Middle Ages. And the Middle Ages was a period of time in Europe in where there was no real political unification, that there were a lot of different small kingdoms, typically all kind of fighting and in rivalries with one another. We call it the Dark Ages or the Middle Ages because there was less, literacy, less knowledge being created. There was a drop in population, kind of a drop off in terms of things like technological advancements, etc., etc. And one event that occurred during the later part of the Middle Ages was the Black Death, otherwise known as the bubonic plague. And one important thing to take note of here, and this is occurring not just in Europe, Asia, and Africa, but the spread of disease. The Black Death or the plague, as illustrated in this image right here, is a good specific example of how disease affected societies in Europe, Asia, and Africa. But being exposed to such pandemics, such as the Black Death or the bubonic plague, it allowed people in the Old World, specifically in Europe as well, to build up immunity to diseases. And one of the ways that the Old World became more exposed to disease was because of livestock, domesticated animals, which in the New World, there really weren't any large domesticated mammals. That led to a lot less disease in the New World, which led to no immunity. Whereas in the Old World, there was much more domestication of animals, and that ultimately led to more diseases, more pandemics like the Black Death, but also led to a built-up immunity to them, which that wasn't the case in the New World. This period, the Middle Ages or the Dark Ages, is sometimes referred to as Feudal Europe or Feudal Society. And again, that means political. We'll go and write this out. Fragmentation. In terms of feudal society, it typically revolved around a castle or a manor. So you got a picture of a European castle here. Because there was no unified political source, Europe was especially susceptible to invasion. And so to protect oneself, many people fled to castles or manors, which offered protection. In return, these castles or manors were headed up by lords, which owned the land. And in return, serfs or farmers were offered protection from these outside invaders. Knights in feudal Europe were people who pledged their loyalty to a specific lord, and in return, the lord provided them with a place to live. The knights would often fight on their behalf. And so this society, lords, knights, and serfs, characterized most of Europe during the Dark Ages, the 1,000 years leading up to 1492, which again is that crucial year that we're focused on here. Now, for all the political fragmentation that existed, there was one unifying force, and that was the Catholic Church. the Catholic Church provided a similar culture for Europe, that despite people having different lords and knights battling each other on the battlefield and different political structures, everybody essentially in Europe practiced Christianity and recognized the Catholic Church, that's the church in Rome, as the legitimate church. So that was a cultural bedrock, so to speak, or a cultural unifier. In terms of serfdom in Europe, very tough. Serfs were essentially tied to the land. It wasn't slavery, but it was similar to slavery in some ways. It was low standard of living. In Europe, the crop which really sort of sustained many people was wheat, whereas when we looked at places like Mesoamerica, it was corn and maize. And of course, I mentioned before, livestock. And the ability to domesticate large animals not only led to things like wheeled vehicles, it also allowed for more labor to be done as opposed to what just a person can do, but it also, of course, is going to build up those crucial immunities to diseases, which make those populations less susceptible to the spread of disease. Now, Christianity becomes a very, and plays a very, very important role in European society. So when we talk about Christianity, originally it was created during the Roman Empire. Early Christians were initially persecuted, but much later on, the Roman Empire actually adopted Christianity and made it the official religion. When the Roman Empire fell, Christianity continued to survive, but it more or less survived in two centers. One of them was in the city of Rome, which is located in Italy, and the other one was Constantinople, which is located in modern-day Turkey. And these really served as kind of the two centers of Christianity for a lot of the time during the early Middle Ages. Slowly but surely, they began to drift apart from one another. The Christian church here in Rome and Italy, this became known as the West. Here it became known as the East. So you essentially have Western Christianity versus Eastern Christianity. This split occurred officially in 1054 CE and is known as the Great Schism in Christianity. In Eastern Christianity in Constantinople, the patriarch is the leader of the church. In Eastern Christianity, Greek is used as the official language of it, whereas when we look at Western Christianity or the Roman Catholic Church, it's the Pope who's in charge. It's Latin that is the official language. And so there tends to be differences within Christianity. The part of Europe that we're most concerned with, because this is ultimately where Christopher Columbus comes from, is the Western version of Christianity, in which the Pope is the official leader of the church. In terms of Christian belief, just kind of, a little bit here to summarize. In Christianity, it's very much about good and evil, heaven and hell. It has a lot to do with morality, how one should live their life, as opposed to other polytheistic religions, which are much more closely tied with the physical and natural world. Christianity is more concerned with what's going to happen to you after you die, and how you should live your life sort of morally and in a just way, than it is with sort of the here and now, so to speak, right? Polytheistic religions tend to be much more about the here and now and the physical world that is about you. In Christian belief, more or less every sort of physical or real world manifestation does have some type of spiritual connotation. So for example, you might see something like a crop failure. And this is where maybe religion is similar to the stuff that we've seen in the Americas. Something like a crop failure might be attributed to something like witchcraft. Witchcraft was certainly a widely held belief in the Middle Ages. The text or the book which holds the Christian belief system is the Holy Bible, which was made official by the Eastern Church early on in the period following the Roman Empire. For the most part, in the Middle Ages, the Bible is exclusively available in the Latin language. And again, knowing what we know about the Middle Ages, is this a particular time period where many people know how to read and write? The answer is no. And so in order for Christian belief to be spread to the population, it required the structure of the Catholic Church. The Pope, who was at the head of it, the Pope then had bishops. And then under that, you may have had things like priests. And, these are really the only people who know how to read and understand the Bible. And so people, for their belief systems, were very much reliant upon the Catholic Church in order to tell them what was the proper way to worship, what is the proper way to get to God, etc., etc. And like I mentioned before, Christianity really served as a unifying factor, right? That for the most part, if you look at modern day nations like France, Italy, Spain, England, wherever in the Western European world, they were united by Western Christianity and recognized the Pope as the sole authority, right, the head authority of Christianity and the Church. However, around 622 CE, you have the development of Islam in the Middle East, which is founded by the Prophet Muhammad, and its teachings are written down in the Quran, which is the holy book of the Islamic religion. So Islam refers to the religion. A Muslim is a person who follows Islam, right? So with Christianity, it's essentially the same word, a Christian, Christianity. And Islam is the official religion. A Muslim is somebody who adheres to Islam. And Muhammad preached a message of monotheism, preached the message of giving alms to the poor, set out a certain criteria under which all Muslims must follow, including a Hajj or pilgrimage to the holy city of Mecca, which is located in the Middle East. Here we got a map of the spread of Islam, originating here in Mecca. Mecca and Medina are the two founding cities, but eventually spreading to many parts of the former Roman Empire, including places like Cairo, Egypt, of course, spreading here into the Middle East. And perhaps for us, and I'll use a different color to make this a little bit easier to see, is here in Spain. And Islam spread to Spain is important because Spain is the country that ultimately funds Christopher Columbus's voyage. They put up the money that allows Columbus to sail to the New World. Now, for a long period of time, not all the time, but certainly for since the founding of Islam, it has come into conflict with the Christian world on more than one occasion. Initially, Islam spread very, very quickly. Its spread was mostly done in the early days, especially the very early days when Muhammad was still alive, was done by conquest. After that, Islam spread primarily through commerce and trade. Muhammad himself was a merchant. The merchant class was an esteemed class in Islamic society, and it spread by commerce in the aftermath of Muhammad and his conquest. But early on, it spread through conquest, and that was halted in Europe at the Battle of Tours, which was fought in France. Tours is somewhere, again, kind of make it so it's easier to identify. Tours is somewhere there, and that's when Christian and Islamic armies clash, ultimately preventing the spread of Islam into European society via this way. For a long time, you'd have Eastern Christianity, the Byzantine Empire, serve as kind of a bulwark. And so even though Islam spread far and wide, Europe was in some cases insulated. Some parts of Europe, right? Not Spain, of course. Spain was more or less under Islamic influence for a long time, right? For a long time. Now, as time went on, essentially you had Spanish Catholic monarchs come into conflict. And again, I'll have to use another color here. You had Catholic kings in Spain come into conflict with Muslim rulers here, and the effort by Catholics in Europe, specifically Spain, to take back or reconquer Spain is referred to as the Reconquista. So the Reconquista is really a kind of an ongoing conflict between Catholics and Muslims in this particular region of Europe. Probably the most well-known conflict, though, between the Christian world and the Islamic world historically were the Crusades. And the Crusades were efforts by the Pope here in Rome to reconquer efforts by the Pope in Rome and the Christian world to reconquer the holy city of Jerusalem, aka also known as the Holy Land, right? Jerusalem being the Holy Land. Jerusalem is a city in the Middle East that has very important religious significance to it. And so this idea that the Christian world was going to reclaim Jerusalem for Christians out of the hands of Muslim rulers was essentially what motivated the Crusades. And so from 1099 CE to 1291 CE, you had a series of religious conflicts, invading Christian armies, attempting to make their way to Jerusalem to capture it. In most cases, the Crusades failed. There was a short period of time where Jerusalem did come under the control of Christian armies, but it didn't stay that way for very long. And so even though we think about the Crusades as these holy wars or these religious wars, they actually have an important significance in terms of the development of the Americas and the New World, which you initially probably wouldn't think of at first, right? You know, what does a holy war in the Middle East have anything to do with the Americas? Well, they had some consequences. A lot of the religious zeal that characterized the Crusades, that is this effort to spread the faith, was also one of the major motivating factors in discovering the New World. Those monarchs in Spain, in Europe, and in other places have a desire to spread Christianity, right? And if that means going off and sailing on a ship in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean to spread Christianity, then so be it. In fact, there were some explorers that were motivated by trying to find a closer route to Jerusalem so that they could send armies via ship. So in terms of asking what motivates someone to jump on a ship and sail out into the unknown, religion can be a major and is a major factor in that. It also meant that those who were not Christian, not Catholic, like Jews and Muslims, were generally expelled. And when we think about the Reconquista, it wasn't just a military conflict, but it was also a religious conflict in which Muslims and Jews were expelled from Spain. You may also come across this term, the Inquisition, which was a holy courtroom, a religious court that would seek out those who were not adhering to the Catholic faith and persecute those who were suspected of being heretics, witches, and not falling in line with the appropriate religion, which was Catholicism in Spain. But perhaps most importantly, the consequences of the Crusades was to revive trade between East and West. And I would say more so than anything else, more so than the religious factor, one of the major motivating factors for Spaniards and those who sail on behalf of Spain, i.e. Christopher Columbus, to sail off into the Atlantic Ocean was to seek out trade goods. And when those European armies went to the Middle East, they came in close contact with highly desired trade goods. These were trade goods like silk, like spices from the Spice Islands, They were things like jewelry, etc., etc. And these were highly desired in Europe. And so the question was, well, where can or how can Europeans get more access to these trade goods? And that was in part what inspired people, or especially Europeans, to go out and begin to look for closer trade routes. Now, these items from the East, like silk, like spices, had historically traveled across the Silk Roads, which were trading routes or what's called, not trails, but routes, trade routes that had stretched from China all the way to Europe. The European traveler Marco Polo had traveled to China, and it actually wrote a book about his experiences and said that China was so wealthy and they had so many trade goods that, you know, you would be stupid not to try and gain access to them. And so this desire to get silk, to get to the spices like pepper and cinnamon and stuff like that, you know, that was a big motivating factor, because those things could also bring in a lot of money, right? You could sell spices for a lot of money. You could sell silk for a lot of money. You know, we'll call this the get rich motivation, right? And the East, China, India, etc., that's essentially where all those trade goods were at. And it was thanks to the Crusades that those trade goods became more available, right? They were more available to Europeans in the aftermath of the Crusades. So focusing specifically on the Iberian Peninsula, the Iberian Peninsula is Spain and Portugal, right? Because in some sense, if we go back up to our map here, right, here's the Iberian Peninsula, right, with the yellow around it. It is Spain and Portugal that have the furthest, right? It's the furthest away from some of the sought after trade goods here. So they're motivated the most to go out and seek an alternate trade route this way. And so it's those nations, Spain and Portugal, which really are the pioneers of the age of exploration. Now, one quick thing to note here, that in fact, when it comes to the discovery of the New World, that there were Vikings who had arrived there first. Leif Erikson had created a trading outpost in eastern Canada, approximately 1000 CE, but really didn't find too much there, and so the settlement was eventually abandoned. So just kind of a quick note, Christopher Columbus was not the first person from the Old World to the New World, but he was certainly the most consequential. So when we look at these countries, Spain and Portugal, it's actually Portugal who was the unlikely pioneer. Portugal wasn't necessarily a very powerful country, a very populous country, a very rich country. It didn't really lead Europe into any of those categories, but they were the first ones to begin this age of exploration, funded by Prince Henry the Navigator, who created a school. Oops. This school was dedicated to map making, shipbuilding, taught people how to navigate, and really through a lot of adopted technology. One way that the Iberian Peninsula benefited from was that because all this trade had been going on, so too did exchanging ideas and exchanging technology. And so a lot of the technology, like the magnetic compass, the triangular sail, gunpowder, which the Portuguese used to defeat their enemies, this had all been invented other places, but had spread to Europe via trade in the hundreds of years prior to 1492. The Portuguese, though, were more interested in sailing to the east via going east, in other words, to go around Africa. And so soon the Portuguese began to set up trade on Western Africa. They set up bases known as factories. And even though the Portuguese didn't get to India initially, they found something of value with Western African trade. And so they continued to fund these expeditions. One of the technological things that I mentioned earlier, right, the triangular sail. The triangular sail allows you to better navigate the wind. I'm not a sailing expert, but apparently when your sail is shaped like a triangle, you can maneuver it better. And this was actually an invention that was created in the Middle East. One of those examples of technological diffusion. So the Portuguese were busy going essentially east, and I'll draw just kind of a crude map here, right? So we're going to pretend here's England, here's Ireland. Which way does the boot go? The boot go that way? That's Italy. That's the Mediterranean. There's Africa. Okay, that's a very, very crude map. So in terms of Portugal, Portugal's located right here. They've gone this way, and they've set up trading bases here. So they're going to keep on trading in this area. But they're essentially trying to get to India this way, right? That's the way that Portugal wants to go. Now, Spain, they're a rival power, right? Spain's located in this area here. Now, Spain had been politically fragmented like most of Europe during the Middle Ages until Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand combined the crowns of two major Spanish empires and created the modern Spanish Empire, right? So Spain became unified. And I believe, it's probably an I believe that occurred that same year as 1492. The Inquisition, we had mentioned that earlier. That's a religious court designed to persecute those who are not following the religious laws. And in combining their kingdoms and creating a unified Spain, Isabella and Ferdinand also successfully completed the Reconquista. And what that meant was that the very last Muslim rulers who had occupied this area here were forced to flee and abandon their area. And so with a unified country, with the threat of Muslim rulers completely gone, Spain could now focus their efforts on overseas trade. And that was to get to the same trade goods that the Portuguese were seeking. The problem for Spain, or one of the problems for Spain, was the fact that the Portuguese had essentially blocked off, and I'll use green here. Where is it? Here it is. The Portuguese had essentially blocked off this area. They were not going to allow their Spanish rivals to come down and get in on the trade. They wanted to make sure that it was more or less all for themselves. And that's when Christopher Columbus steps in. Now, Christopher Columbus was a sailor. He was a navigator. He was somebody who knew how to sail a ship, and you could trust him with a ship. However, his idea was that he could sail not around Africa, but rather Columbus believed he could sail this direction, right? He could sail essentially west and pop up on the other side of the world and eventually reach China, which is in somewhere over here. Now, this is contrary to popular belief that the world was flat. In fact, Columbus's mistake was not that the world was flat, right? People at that time understood the world was round, so that wasn't it. Columbus's mistake was he believed the world was actually much smaller than it actually was, right? He thought the world was smaller and that he could sail this way and essentially end up in China. Rather, in 1492, when Queen Isabella and Ferdinand, so Columbus, after being rejected by many other kings and queens, Portugal didn't want to give him the money. Merchants in Italy didn't want to give him the money. But eventually, Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand sort of gambled on Columbus. They gave him enough money to have a crew, 3 ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. And in 1492, they gave Christopher Columbus what he needed, and he sailed off in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, hoping that he would arrive in China. And instead, as we know, where he landed was in fact not China. And again, this is going to be a really bad map, but he landed in the New World, more specifically the Bahamas. And so that's the story of how Christopher Columbus, an Italian, sailing on behalf of Spain, trying to get to China, ended up in the New World and the Bahamas.